edition of Pit Lane Parlay. My name is host Mike Jokum. With me, I have guest host for the week, Matt Hickey, and with us for the first part of the show is Byrd Racing CEO David Byrd. Matt, how are you? And David, how you doing tonight?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Matt, thanks for stepping in. Jess will be back with us next week, and I'm sure some people might be disappointed that Jess's comical questions will not be joining us tonight on the interview here. But I'm gonna jump right into it here. Naturally, I lost my list of questions that I had saved on my computer. David, I'm sure you watched the first IndyCar race of the year, and you've been following along. What do you think about the new IndyCar, looks-wise, racing-wise, and how do you feel that the direction of IndyCar is headed so far?
I was actually at the first race of the year. I think the cars look fantastic, and I think that the sheer volume of on-track passes and what the guys were able to do to showcase their skills and their talent, and really bring the driver back into play, level the playing field in some respects. Put things more back in the driver's hands is always a good thing, I think. And from all appearances, IndyCar seems to be on a nice upward trajectory. The new TV contracts, I'm very excited about that. Obviously, challenges with the title sponsor, but I think that the TV contract will help land that. New teams, both full-time and part-time. It's really fantastic to see. There's opportunities for more drivers to make appearances. You see with Coyne with a couple drivers splitting the seat there. You see that with Juncos as well, a couple drivers splitting the seat. So I think it's all signs of strength and things turning in the right direction. And honestly, with both engines are solid. I don't think you can really go wrong with either one at this point in time. Jay Fry, Mark Miles, all doing a fantastic job, it appears. And everything's firing on all cylinders. So I'm looking forward to hopefully being a part of it again sometime in the near future. We'll see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, I'll save that question for a couple minutes here.
Sure.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, and obviously, as everybody who listens to this show knows, our "In J Fry We Trust" shirts will be published online by the time you probably listen to this episode. I got everything finalized the other day. So far, Matt and Jessica are the only two people who have seen it. I'm excited to share it. I think it turned out pretty good, and hopefully everybody wants to buy one. But I will turn it over to Matt to jump in with a question.
All right, David, it's nice to have you on. I'm a big fan. Just a personal shout out for your guys' support of Connor Daly, my favorite driver a couple years ago. Meant a lot to see him in for full-time season. But I turned to actually fan questions this week. I didn't want to steal Jess's thunder, so I just actually went to Twitter and asked some questions. So we'll start off with Brian Spiller, Twitter handle Brian_Spiller. He wanted to know, since we're kind of on the topic of current IndyCar situation, what your thoughts are on the current situation as far as the engine manufacturers go, and if you think if a third engine manufacturer will help grow IndyCar and help the car counts that we're seeing rising continue to rise.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that right now you couldn't ask for two better manufacturer partners than Honda and Chevy. I mean, they are providing substantial support. Bulletproof engines. They are really elevating the game, helping teams to make strides, investing on the outside looking in, appears to be investing in teams as well, and kind of sharing the love a little bit and spreading their support around. So I think it would take a whole new engine platform probably to entice a third manufacturer to come on board. I think that Honda and Chevy are going above and beyond the call. When they both signed off with the current engine formula, I think neither one expected to be. There just would be two engines. So when they made their long range plans, there was probably, not the expectation they would be, you know, having to provide engines for, at Indianapolis at least, for, upwards of, 17, 18, 19 cars in some respects. So, obviously, when you look at the powerhouse teams, the top teams, although it's really the distance between top and bottom in terms of the teams that have been around IndyCar for several years, the gap is growing. I think is getting closer between those top and bottom teams, and it's tough to really say who's at the bottom in terms of the long-term teams and who's at the top. But I can see a value in a third manufacturer in the sense that they would probably be encouraged to partner with a Rahal or a Carpenter or even a Foyt team to invest resources in one of those teams to fill in the gaps of what their gaps in their program might be in terms of personnel or funding or whatever. And I don't know that would contribute to more cars on the grid necessarily. I think it would make it easier to hit the 33 number at the Speedway, which we're always all concerned about, but seems to be less of a concern this year, thankfully. But I think there's a natural number at which you can really play when it comes to the full-time grid. And right now, I don't think you could look at IndyCar and look at the series. I mean, they're going to be turning loose just about 10 miles from my house tomorrow night here at Phoenix. And it's a deep field, and I think that it'd be difficult to argue that there's any time in the history of IndyCar racing in which there's been a deeper field, top to bottom, or more robust, representation of drivers that could conceivably win a race. I think it's very difficult. I think with the new aero kit and with the engines the way they are, it's difficult to handicap races these days. I mean, I think we can all honestly look at the St. Petersburg race and say none of us knew how that race was going to play out going in.
Well, you must not see my fantasy IndyCar league, because apparently I was the only one that wasn't onto the Bourdais, Rossi, Rahal, Hinch train, I guess. I was like the only one who didn't pick any of those guys. But
yeah. So, I fancy myself a student of the sport, and been around it for my entire life. And I was talking to people at the St. Pete race, and the morning of the race, well, who do you think is going to win? I have no idea. I mean, usually you get a good feel for how it's going to play out. So I think that 26 cars will take the track tomorrow at Phoenix, and I think that you could reasonably say that 20 of those could end up in victory lane, and you wouldn't be surprised in any of the 20. And that's just a remarkable testimony to the way things are going these days, and again, what Honda and Chevy have done, and Delar's commitment, and what IndyCar is doing, and how much the teams are investing, and the types of drivers that are being attracted to IndyCar right now. And a third manufacturer would certainly, I think, add to that, but I don't think it's going to add a lot of depth in terms of size to the field. But it certainly might create some more stability for some of the teams that might be a little more marginal, let's say.
For sure, and it's nice to kind of hear your insight on it, since you've been on the ground floor of these kind of paddock areas and projects with being on that side of things as far as the team side. So that's good to hear. So we'll bounce back to Mike here.
Yeah, great point about St. Pete, and bummed I didn't run into you while I was down there. I think every practice that weekend was led by somebody different. Guys were bouncing all around, and obviously we know how the race went. But I'm curious, how did your partnership come up between Bilardi Racing, Baldwin Brothers Racing, and Chris Windom in terms of the Freedom 100? The more I read about this story, which I'll get into at some point in this episode, the more I'm impressed with Chris Windom. I don't follow dirt racing nearly as close as Jessica does, as most people know, but it seems like a pretty cool story. He's racing, just for the listeners who don't know, in 5 different racing divisions in 7 days. And the Indy Star, or one of the newspapers out there, is titling it Wyndham's Wild Week, which I think is a little bit more interesting than the Danica Double. So how just in terms of a racing perspective, but how did this all come together?
Well, I grew up at the short tracks. My racing world started at the Indianapolis Speedrome and on the east side of Indianapolis back when I was 3 years old. And my dad started owning race cars there when I was 5 years old. And as a side, my brother, Jonathan Byrd II, actually is the track president of the Speedrome. So kind of his dream job, so to speak. But been doing that just started to kick off their second season with him at the helm this weekend. So we started running late models. My dad owned late model race cars. We got into midget racing shortly thereafter in 1984 with Rich Vogler, who was just one of the greatest racers of all time. And from that, we quickly, just progressed and went from, in 1985, we went to the Indy 500 with Rich Vogler. So we ran Indy 5 times with Rich Vogler. He was a multi-time USAC sprint car and midget champion. And then Rich passed away in 1990, and then we shipped it over to Stan Fox, and then had a variety of drivers over the years. And then we were out of racing for a while, and then came back with Brian Clausen in 2015. Just kind of go back to our roots of the short track guy, the USAC champion, the guy who would normally in the past, the Floyds and the Andrettis and guys like that who would, the Rutherfords would make their way on the short tracks of America and then, come to the big stage of Indianapolis and make their name and make their fame. And Brian was a guy who ticked a lot of boxes for us. So, and it got a lot of attention. So, unfortunately, Brian had his accident and is no longer with us, of course. So we sat out for a year, but I just sat back. There's something satisfying about, bringing that guy that races 80, 90, 100 times a year who, just out there earning his living as a race car driver and who wins and competes and is honestly, 2 or 3 times a weekend is out there competing against the best in the business at what they do. And also feels at the same time that no matter what they do, no matter how many races they win, no matter how many championships they win, that they're going to be shut out from Indianapolis and think that path, some go on the NASCAR, but it's not really what they want. They want to race at Indy. This is what they just grew up dreaming about, and they're open wheel racers. And it's a different type of open wheel, but it's open wheel, and it's where the excitement lies. So I sat back last year and just watched, had my eye on about 7 or 8 different drivers from the USAC ranks, and basically wanted to see how the season played out. And Chris Windham had already won a Silver Crown Championship in 2016. That's the top tier USAC division. And then he added the USAC Sprint Car Championship last year. So I reached out to Chris and said, hey, are you interested in trying to make your way to Indianapolis? And he unsurprisingly said he was. And so I said, well, let's start talking about this. So I had actually had some conversations with Brian Bellardi earlier in the summer last year about the possibility of, perhaps bringing a short track racer to an Indy Lights program to start with, because just going from a sprint car and a midget Silver Crown car to an Indy car would be honestly a recipe for disaster. I think that
sure.
It's such a different world, and you need some training wheels, so to speak. Even though when these guys get in an Indy Lights car, it's the least powerful race car they'll ever race. Honestly.
Right.
But it's just you just have to learn the process. What it's like to deal with the engineer and the crew chief and the shocks and the form and the wings and the settings and doing your lap maps and your looking at throttle traces and your rake and all those different things you have to do to learn the process of making your way to an Indy car. So Brian was open to it. He had worked with Jacob Wilson a few years back, who's made a name for himself in pavement sprint car racing, both winged and non-winged, won the Little 500 several times, and so he was open to the idea. And Chris had some supporters, some longtime sponsors, Kenny Baldwin being one of them, who he won the sprint car championship for last year, who was open to being part of, hopefully taking Chris to the 500 and with a plan to make that happen. So. We got to work at it, and I'd never actually spoken to Chris before. I just sent him a direct message on Twitter in November after he won the championship and said, hey, I'd love you to give me a call when you get a chance. So we talked, and then we talked a few times, and then we actually met for the first time in person at the Chili Bowl in January, and just got the ball rolling and put it all together with his partners and of course, the support of my family and our businesses, and then, Byrd willing to make a commitment as well to bring that short track guy and run through the process, and here we are. So it's part of our roots, and part of, it's just, again, there's a satisfaction of bringing that type of driver to Indy, because they are very much in the mold of, Foyt and Andretti and, Tony Stewart, obviously Brian Clausen. And there's a challenge to it. These guys, they're not groomed from their entire racing career to succeed in this type of car. I mean, it's a challenge for them to really go out and race against the guys who were in karts and then, Formula Fords and F4 and F2000 and Mazdas and Indy Lights and on up. But what you can't substitute is they just have a sheer volume of racing experience and racing knowledge and a maturity and a temperament that it takes to do it and to get it right. So beyond that, Chris already pretty much had it. The rest of his schedule was in place with sprint cars and Silver Crown and the Little 500. So, we like doing things that are unique and interesting. Our family's history in racing has that. So, like, the very first person to ever run the double was John Andretti, the Indy Charlotte double, and he did that in 1994. I did that for my dad. My dad put that together, and he ran for my dad on both ends of the double. When the IRL started, the first team that was able to secure the services of an Indy 500 champion was Jonathan Byrd's Racing, when we brought Arie Luyendyk into the Indy Racing League and had some success with Arie in that. The first when Brian Clausen did the Indiana double, when a driver raced at the 500 and then raced a sprint car at Kokomo that night, that was the first time that had ever been done. And now with Chris Windham and Wyndham's Wild Week, and I will take credit for that. I came up with that with that idea to say, to be the first and only driver to ever even attempt to race the schedule that he's going to be racing during Memorial Day week is it's unique. So it adds that much more excitement and that much more fun to all the effort and the work and the investment that goes into putting these kind of programs together, and it just engages the short track community to see what their guy is going to do. And I think Chris is a talented and skilled racer. Getting to know him more and more. I was spending more time with him, both in person and texting and on the phone as we work together and creating a plan for this year and hopefully the next couple of years at the least. There's a weight of a massive racing community on his shoulders to be the guy that's kind of taken the hopes and the dreams of short track racers and short track fans to take that to Indianapolis and hopefully succeed. And it takes a committed and determined and dedicated and special racer to be able to handle that. So we're gonna see what we have in that with Mr. Windham.
Yeah, that's it's awesome. I love it, and hopefully at some point here, or maybe while I'm out in Indianapolis that week, I get to talk to Chris, and I am going to try to join on as much of Wyndham's Wild Week as possible. Once I figure out how I can get everywhere, hopefully Uber is readily available.
Well, you'll get we'll have T-shirts too, so make sure you pick up a T-shirt as well.
Course.
So
yeah.
It's pretty easy. The Thursday and Friday is pretty easy because Thursday and Friday that's all just in Indianapolis between the Speedway and the Fairgrounds and Raceway Park. So that's all pretty easy. It's a little tougher to get to Anderson and Kokomo on the Uber side of things, but you can make a few.
I'll find a way to make it work, and as soon as we see those T-shirts available, I'll be sure to tweet out some links and purchase a few myself, and maybe do them as a giveaway for the podcast here. I will turn it back over to Matt.
Okay, so I just want to give a quick shout out to one of our submitted questions from Justin Mann, whose Twitter handle is @manbeast, who kind of wanted to get a background about how the Byrd family got into racing, and you really touched well on that in your question there. So I just wanted to thank Justin for submitting his question. So kind of touching on your question as well with another question we had submitted from Matthew Gruenholz. That's also his Twitter handle, one word, who will always be the Stig in my heart. For those of you who are familiar with Twitter. He submitted a question to me, and it kind of piggybacks because you mentioned a lot of great names within your answer there. looking at past drivers and cars that you have represented or you and your family have represented, is there any one driver that stands out to you that would be, I don't know, quote unquote your favorite, or one that you just consider quote unquote the most memorable?
Wow. Oh, probably Rich Vogler. Just because, Rich was, again, a multi-time USAC midget sprint car champion. He did all the work on his own cars. He just kind of designed and built his own midgets. We gave him good equipment at Indy. A couple of years we went, and other years it was kind of moderate equipment. But he took to the speedway so easily that had we been able to give him the kind of equipment that we gave others on down in the years, he would have. And there's no doubt in my mind he would have been a multi-time Indy 500 champion. And also because he won two USAC midget championships in my dad's cars. So that's, kind of a special thing there. And then that really cemented our racing legacy, so to speak, or gave us a platform to move forward. So, so Vogler's probably, number one on the list. And then, Arie Luyendyk, just because he did something special, for us, a history-making feat at Indy where he set the all-time track record in qualifying in 1996, and it's probably a speed record that will always stand, just because of the way the sport has evolved and the track and insurance, things like that. So to be able to have a car that was our program, our car, my dad's program he put together. That's that's the fastest Indy car in history, is kind of special. And then I would say, Buddy Lazier, he was our best finish ever at Indy was with Buddy Lazier. We finished fifth with him in 2005. That was a program my brother and I put together after our father had a stroke and was disabled. So we kind of put an Indy 500 program together, kind of to honor him and what he'd done to kind of set us on that path. And we had a great month. Our best start ever was ninth. Our best finish ever was fifth. And we honestly, it was really one of the first times we ever had a chance to really be in the mix to win the race. When those closing laps were upon us, and had the yellow flags flown right, we would have been right there. And that was this Buddy had driven for us in his rookie year in 1991, and then back in kind of a revival year for Buddy back in 2005, and he honestly set the path for Panther Racing to have great success at Indy.
I was about to say, was that with Panther Racing? Because
yeah,
I know that he must have been the only driver that race that wasn't taken out, or the only Panther driver per se that wasn't taken out by Danica that race.
Yeah. That was Panther Byrd Brothers Racing, and we had it played out just right, and his setup is really what Panther was able to use at Indy for the years following that to really have multiple second place finishes and then almost to take home that win with Hildebrand in 2011 in the final year of the old formula. So I think he set a nice stage there. To be part of that's kind of special. And then of course with Brian, those 2 years we had him with him, we led some laps in 2016 in the 100th running with Brian. Now they were under caution, I will admit that, and we were just staying out to get our lap back. But they still counted, and we've never led laps in Indianapolis before. In all the years we've been there, we've had 19 cars run the 500, and we never let a lap. So that was cool. And then to go and end that in that race, and then for him to go up to Kokomo Speedway and win the sprint car race that night was pretty special as well. And then of course that was part of the whole Chasing 200 tour, the Circular Insanity tour that we had worked hard to put together and were in the process of pulling off before he was taken from us. So there's some that are, obviously that stand out. There's some that are a little less memorable, and that did special things for us in different respects. But those are the ones that I will always probably talk about first and foremost.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's just a hugely decorated list. And yeah, I mean, your guys' support for a lot of the racing drivers that have come through IndyCar and have raced at Indianapolis has been great. So. Pretty sure Mike might have a couple thoughts, and then I'll toss it back to him for a question.
Yeah, well said. I think leading any laps at the Indy 500, whether it be under caution or not, is a huge feat, especially for Clausen. I remember, I can remember what part of the couch I was sitting on during that caution. Partially because we couldn't figure out why our TV all of a sudden went into Spanish, but I digress. Thank you to my wife for figuring out how to change the TV while my dad and I just stood there and cursed at it. I kind of touched on it earlier that I was at least going to ask it. I've read some things that there was a potential to team up with an IndyCar team as well, maybe with somebody like James Davison as a second driver for a Harding car, or one of the other teams looking for a third car possibly. Is that a possibility? Are you exploring the possibility, or is it more likely that your focus will be on Chris Windom and kind of developing his open wheel craft over the next couple years?
I'll say this. I met James in 2014 when he first ran the 500, and I talked to him because it was after he'd run the race, because he was like the last minute addition to the KV racing platform, and we had already made our agreement with KVSH to run the 500 in 2015. So I wanted to get James's take as a third. I think it was the third car for KV that year, maybe the fourth. How that went for him. It was a very last minute program, but I was also impressed with how he'd run, how he had come in at the last minute, had a couple days, maybe 1 day of practice before he qualified, and then ran a pretty decent race. That's when I first met him. So we'd stayed in contact, stayed in touch, and throughout the years since then. And last year I sat in the seats we'd had for 20-something years, 30 years at Indy, and hating every second of it because it's tough to go from the pit box to the stand.
Sure.
But enjoyed the race thoroughly and watched James all the way through it, to see what he did starting last and knowing what the situation was for him. And I think he had 3 hours of practice total before he actually ran the race, and was running the Detroit car with the Detroit gearbox with a stock Dallara rear wing, and starting last with a ton of downforce on the car, so he could just hopefully finish the race, and to see what he did to go from last to first, and really had an unfortunate accident with Serbia there, but he was going for the win. And the checkered flag flew. I left my seat. I went straight to the Dale Coyne Racing garage, went to James and said, "James, that was the most impressive thing I've ever seen here, and we need to work on putting a program together for the 500 next year." And so he went from pretty down in the dumps in the moment to, slightly more enthusiastic about the result of his day. So we kind of set to work on that, and I will say that I've, he and I, or him or me, or the two of us, or just me by myself, I've spoken to every team about doing a deal except for Penske, because Roger doesn't do that. I mean, I have a massive respect for the captain, but he just doesn't do that. So what's the point of talking to Roger about that? Had a couple deals that we thought were done, that didn't end up getting done. Had folks had team owners tell me, once we get past this date, then we'll talk about it, because we're trying to figure things out right now, and then not get back to me, and then announce other deals that they got done, instead of doing a deal with us. And it's been a strange off season, and then early part of this racing season. It's really surprising that it's been difficult to lock down a program, and then once the numbers hit 33. Chevy and Honda don't have a whole lot of incentive to push more cars out into the mix. And, for one, because they're competing against themselves. Two, full-time teams don't really want to take the risk of, damaging cars, or perhaps sending their full-time driver home if they don't make the race and get bumped out for some reason by a one-off. And then on the Honda and Chevy side, people have to understand that, that engine doesn't fire, for that car without a Honda or Chevy tech, with that engine, monitoring the software. And those, if there's, 12 guys, or 13 guys maybe that do this full time, and that are fully trained and fully aware of the software capabilities and the mapping and all the things like that, you can't just pull those guys out of the hat that can do the same thing for a team at Indy. And if they don't work for the company, if they don't work for Ilmor, they don't work for HPD. There's sometimes a hesitancy to share that intellectual property with people who don't work for them full time because they don't want to lose that data. So, it's understandable why it's tough to get past those numbers at 33. And I at Phoenix during the open test, I talked to everybody again. I mean, except for Roger. I would love to talk with Roger, just sit down and just pick his brain about something, but
sure.
Not about running a car at Indy. I walked away from that open test thinking, all right, there's one possibility here that might was somewhat interested in making a deal with me perhaps. And then I said, I was talking to James and I said, here's where we are, and I know I had one conversation with somebody, and there is no way possible that we're going to get a deal with this guy. He's just not going to do it. And then, weeks later, we were back talking about the possibility with the guy who I said there was no possible way of doing a deal. Well, that's who we were talking to about the possibility of doing a deal. So, nothing's done yet, unfortunately. But it's been a pretty open secret that I've been working with James just because I think he can show very, very well at Indy. And he has shown very well at Indy, given limited opportunities to show what he can do there. I mean, when he's run there 3 times, and the first time he ran, he had, I think, 1 day of practice before qualifying, and about a week and a half notice that he was actually going to be able to run. The second time he ran, he had 3 days of practice. He wasn't able to qualify his own car because he had World Challenge conflicts with the Nissan program, and he had about a week and a half notice that he was going to run Indy. And then third time he ran was just last year. Again, didn't get a chance to qualify and had less than a week's notice before the race that he was going to run Indy. So I'm hoping if we can get it done, I'm hoping it's not going to be that close. But I'd like to get it done, and we've got some deadlines that we need to hit to make it work, and I remain hopeful. But I also see James as a driver. There's 3 drivers on our driver roster over the years that I see James as an amalgamation of, and those are Ari Leindyke, because I think James has a feel for the speedway like Ari did. Scott Brayton, because Scott Brayton was absolutely fearless around Indy and wanted to be the fastest guy there. And then, which I think James is fearless when it comes to the way he attacks the track at the speedway, and is supremely confident in himself. And then Buddy Lazier, because he's always just been the most aggressive guy. He always had that, they call him a bulldog, right? So James has that aggressive approach to racing, not just in Indy but everywhere. So I see him as a mixture of those 3 guys. So if he could ever have the opportunity to have a proper program where he knew it going in, had the full allotment of mileage and tires and practice days, and I think he could very quite easily end up with a space in the Borg Warner. So it's just it's a daily thing. Hopefully some things can happen. Obviously IndyCar's in Phoenix this weekend. It's my hometown, so I'll be out there having conversations with folks and hopefully trying to button some things down. But we're getting close to a time where it's got to get done or it just can't get done at all, because Chevy and Honda, they all have to know. They give you deadlines as well as to when you're going to pull, when they need to have the trigger pulled.
Yeah, for sure. Great piece there all around. I love the comparison to Brayton, Leindyke, and Buddy Lazier. We'll wrap things up with one more question from Matt, and then sticking with our usual slightly off-topic questions, I'll go with one non-racing question to finish it off. But I'll let Matt step in first.
Yeah, so just thanks to the people who submitted the questions on Twitter. Sorry for the shenanigans too. Just want to give a shout out to Jake Neely, who's at IndyCarFan25 Real quick, David, Jake is a huge fan of James Davison. I know that, so he would really love to see you guys get something together. Because I know, let me just throw in that for Jake. I know he'd appreciate that. He's a huge fan of James. Also, my buddy David Lighting Jr. Twitter handle at D and it's LITE _47. He also submitted a question. Thanks for doing that. Appreciate that. I hope they both understand because they've both met my mother. And this last question actually comes from my mom. And so it's kind of a two-part question. It's she actually told me about this one at Easter. So here we go. The first part is, what are your thoughts? Because we can't go an episode on Pickle and Parlay without talking about Danica Patrick. So what are your thoughts about Danica Patrick coming back to Indy? And then the second part, she could be described as someone who's not very fond of Danica, to kind of put it lightly. So she wanted to know if you thought there was any chance she could get bumped this year.
Okay, I'll just at the second one first. No, there's no way. Danica, she always performed very well at Indy. It was probably her strongest track.
Well, hang on. My mom's always right, so just remember that, okay?
Okay. Well, she didn't say she's going to get bumped, did she? She said after the issue.
Oh, no, she's got the hashtag bump Danica going, even though she doesn't even have Twitter, but she's been doing hashtag bump Danica ever since she's been announced. So, yes, she's saying it's going to happen.
She just walks around telling people hashtag bump Danica.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, again, I'll take the second part first. I don't think there's any chance that Danica gets bumped. I don't think she'll have any struggle making the necessary speed. She's with Ed Carpenter Racing, and they've always had great pieces at Indy. Are all through the challenge. The changes they've undergone over the years. Ed obviously has a great feel for the track. Even the new Arrow, I don't think it'll change that much for them. And I wouldn't be shocked to see her in the Fast 9, honestly. She just, Indy was always her strongest track. And I think there's a little something to be said for the fact that she's lighter, and it helps. So my feelings about it is I was a little bit irritated because it made the opportunity to get James in a seat that much tougher because it took up a seat that was otherwise going to be available. But I think it's good. I think that, more attention to Indianapolis is always a good thing. And, I think it's, whether or not people think it's warranted or not, attention is attention. So it goes to one driver. It's to the race, it's to the series, and it's to the event. And I think that's a good thing. I like Danica. I've been able to spend a little time with her in the past when she was with Ricky Stenhouse, and Ricky Stenhouse was racing for Brian Clausen Racing at the Chili Bowl. So Danica would be there, and she would be just hanging out and selling T-shirts and signing autographs and taking pictures and just once she knew you didn't want anything from her, she would let her guard down and just kind of just relax and be fun and be. Have a personality that probably she isn't able to let show through that much. And I tell a funny story that, I think it's a funny story. My wife and Danica were there and it's kind of near each other. And so finally my wife says to Danica, she said, "I just want to tell you are so pretty." And then Danica says back to my wife, "I've been wanting to tell you that you are so pretty." And I jumped in and said, "Oh my God, you're both so pretty." "No, you're the prettiest." "No, you're the prettiest." So you get to go know her a little bit. I think she'll do very well. You can't. I don't think you can take her NASCAR record as an example of anything other than the natural and normal challenges that any Formula car driver has faced going to race stock cars. I don't think, apart from Juan Montoya, who was given 10 years to succeed in NASCAR. Or however many years it was, I think 10 almost. What successful Formula car driver has ever made the transition to NASCAR and performed well? I mean, champions like Frank Heavey and Hornish and Scott Pruitt, Robbie Gordon, and they all struggled. And so to see Danica struggle the way she did was not surprising at all. And anybody who had expectations beyond a very average run were just not paying attention to the history of racing. But that said, that much racing and that much dealing with a loose race car and a tight race car, and the way the track changes and the degradation of the tires and all that goes along with that, it can't help but make you overall a so much better race car driver. So that she's going to be a better race car driver coming back to run the 500 than she was when she left IndyCar. And that's why I'm confident that she will do well.
Great answer.
Well, thank you.
Finish it out with one non-racing question here for some fun. Jess wouldn't let me ask a few of our other typical Jess questions, so I'm gonna go with one, and I'm gonna add an answer to this afterwards because I didn't have an answer when we talked to Jay Fry last week and Stephen Wilson the week before. But David, the worst movie you've ever seen, what is it?
Oh, worst movie I've ever seen. Do you want me to say Driven? Just because it's the
That's what Stephen said.
That seems to be the popular pick.
I think it's a popular answer for people who are in the racing world because it's so just, it's so unrealistic in so many ways. But, I got to give it credit because it was, at least attempting to make a racing movie. So I can't make it my worst movie ever. But it's sad that it comes to mind, the first thing. But if I wasn't thinking racing, it's tough to do because I'm thinking about racing all the time. But if I wasn't thinking racing, Driven probably would not pop to mind to start with. So, worst movie I've ever seen. I think there was, some kind of vampire battling werewolf movie. Pathfinder.
Okay, haven't seen that one.
It came out about a year after maybe the 300, so it kind of had that feel to it going in, kind of like the whole Viking and early America, primitive America times. And me and my best friend, had really high hopes for it, and we went in. It's the only movie I've ever walked out of in the middle of a movie, so I think that has to win for worst movie ever.
Yeah.
So, and I'm probably the only person who has ever talked about Pathfinder during any kind of interview, apart from the people who made the movie or were in the movie. So maybe that's a feather in my cap.
I'm gonna write it down, and if I have some downtime someday soon, just try to check it out. I'm gonna throw one in there, and Matt, if you'd like to throw one in there before we wrap up with David. My new vote is the movie Downsizing with Matt Damon.
Ooh, really?
I felt I don't even know the words to describe how bored I was, except I took the dog for a walk partway through, came back, still figured out what was going on, and then the movie ended, and I just felt like it was a terrible ending. Really wasn't all that exciting. It was pretty predictable. I'm not going to ruin the movie if you haven't seen it, but definitely, at least in a long time, the most disappointing movie I've ever seen here, or at least,
Well, I've been
at
the gym. When I've been at the gym lately, I've seen some reviews and previews of it on the screen while I've been at the gym, and I thought, well, I didn't see that. That looks interesting, but now I guess I won't waste my time.
I'm glad we only rented it on demand, and I did not see it in the movie theaters. So it was only a couple dollars. But definitely not my favorite. But listen, David, you've been an awesome guest. Thank you for spending the better part of 40 minutes here chatting with us about racing. Love everything I hear. Wish you the best of luck in your search with Mr. Davison, and best of luck in helping Chris Windom develop this year and in the next couple years. Look forward to seeing you out in Indy in May. And with that, we'll let you go. Thank you again.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and best of luck leading up to May and in May.
It's been my pleasure, and stay tuned. Hopefully, we've got some stuff. Hopefully, we can get some stuff done, and there'll be some more stuff coming our way. And don't forget, we're also sponsoring Kevin Thomas Jr. this year in the in his sprint car program. So
Perfect.
he's a guy we want to see move up the ranks too. So thanks for having me, and I'll see you at Indy.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good one. Just for the record, my worst movie ever, Spider-Man 3, if anybody's interested. It's the worst movie I've ever seen by a country mile.
Yeah. Thank you again to David Byrd for joining us, for a majority of the episode here. Great insight. Look forward to seeing him in May with Chris Windom and, maybe with, somebody else for the Indy 500, if not. We shall see, and time will tell. Some deals all always come together at the last minute here. Moving on, just two quick bits of news, and then going to introduce a new thing that Matt has been doing in the social media world here in regards to IndyCar. What Jess and I talked about a couple weeks ago in terms of Phoenix using a tire machine to kind of create a second lane for the IndyCar race. I know, for those who don't remember, Jess was not a fan. I was a fan. And Jess isn't here to defend herself, so haha, Jess, I win. I'm sure she's going to text me as soon as she listens to this part to yell at me for saying that. I think it's a good thing. It'll adding a second groove should help create a better race. I know some might say it's manufactured by doing this, but I don't know if I would go as far as it's manufactured racing. Instead, I'm going to call it making sure that the IndyCar drivers have as much chances as possible to improve their position and improve the racing. I don't think you're manufacturing anything, because it could still end up being a boring race. I don't think it's going to be. On the record, I think the race is going to be much better than it has been the last few years. But Matt, what do you think, and what are your expectations overall for the Phoenix race this weekend, or ISM Raceway, or ISR Raceway, whatever it is now?
Whatever they're calling it nowadays.
Yeah.
I think the last couple of years has been a bit of a kerfuffle. I think I think it represents kind of what was wrong with aero kits, just with too much dirty air, too much not being able to suck up on the car behind you. It just didn't do a whole lot for me. So I think with or without the, what do they call them, tire dragon, I think the racing is going to be better. Hopefully we see more drafting. Hopefully we see cars being able to suck up easier, and the tire degradation will play a key into that. Maybe we'll get some strategery out there. Who knows? But I think, to your guys' point, well, it's kind of to Jess's point. She's not here to defend herself, and she's also moving to Florida while you and I are suffering through snow right now. So I don't really have too much sympathy for her, although we do miss her on the show. But I think you both kind of had made great points. I stay on the side of, I'm kind of pretty neutral. I'll take a Switzerland kind of stance on this one. That I think I could see why people might be upset by it, but personally, if it enhances the product, then to me, I don't think I'll get too bent out of shape over it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm sure we'll be able to see how it is tomorrow night for practice and qualifying. I believe they're going to be using this tire machine multiple times throughout the weekend to keep the quality of that second lane about the same through all the different
actually
sessions.
It would have been really helpful in like a day and age where IndyCar ran with a different series that used different compounds in the same weekend, like when NASCAR trucks used to run.
Yep.
And I know drivers always commented on how it really kind of messed the groove up a little bit. So that would have been great invention back in the day. But yeah, hopefully it comes together this time around.
Yeah, for sure. The only small other bit of news was Renee Binder extending his Juncos Racing deal to the duel in Detroit. Hopefully he can have a better performance than week one in St. Pete. He's not racing this weekend. Kyle Kaiser is making his debut, as well as Pietro Fittipaldi, or as his Instagram story at Starbucks posted, Pietro Fittipaldi. for the, I guess we don't need to make fun of Starbucks on this episode. So that's really it on the news. I just wanted to make fun of Starbucks a little bit there. I think PHO is pretty easy, especially when you spell it out. But nonetheless, one of the things, that Matt has been doing, you can find it on his Twitter, at IndyCar_MN, is a driver rating system. I've seen others do it. I think there might be one for F1, and I know there's something similar in other sports. I'll let Matt explain what it is real quick, and give a quick overview, and definitely check it out. I'd say Matt's week 1 findings were pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean, the first race in St. Petersburg was kind of a perfect reflection from that. If you're someone who didn't get a chance to watch St. Petersburg, or someone who didn't get to catch the race, you're looking at the results and you're like, oh, okay, well, Wickens started on the pole, led a bunch of laps, but finished 18th, so I guess he didn't have that great of a race. But in reality, when you take all the statistical components of the race, which is something that I absolutely love, just raw data and looking at stats, there's something that we're missing as far as evaluating the true strength of drivers, and it kind of comes back to a Moneyball philosophy, if anybody's familiar with that movie, about the Oakland Athletics back in the early 2000s, basically getting undesirable players on their baseball team, and with a low budget being able to beat the Yankees. And racing and baseball, it's not comparable. Baseball is very stat oriented, whereas racing, you can have a mechanical failure, you can have a bad strategy go your way. And so the whole purpose behind it is to take away some of the argy-bargy nature of racing and kind of get down to the true nature of the quality of a driver based on all factors. And so I've been working on it. I will continue to do it this year. I get downtime at work and then just downtime around here, just in my home, just to watch a race. And thankfully, YouTube, you can watch races twice as fast to kind of get not only the stats, the data, but then just kind of there's got to be a little component as far as human touch with, if something does go wrong, you have to reflect that in the statistical components. And already I started on the 2008 season, just to kind of a baseline. And there's 2 drivers who I've kind of always not looked down upon per se, but just never had a favorable opinion of, and that would be Ryan Briscoe and Oriol Servia. And the new rating system has already shown me that they are much better than what their results allude to. For example, Briscoe in 08, he was running really well at a couple races, Watkins Glen, St. Pete, a couple others where things were going well, but then something just went wrong, and Watkins Glen, Dixon spun under yellow, and Briscoe got collected in it and really just ruined his race. And that's not going to show up in a championship standings or in just, your average finish. And so that's what this is trying to get at, is that, Robert Wickens was the best driver at St. Petersburg. He just didn't have a win to show for it. And so that's what the goal was there. I've been toying around with the idea for a long time. At least I wrote an article about it on my old blog about 4 years ago or so. So to kind of see it get launched, racing sometimes can be a bit of a bit of a horse hockey situation. So we got to kind of cut through some of the contributing factors that may be out of the driver's hand to kind of show who is actually maybe the best driver through a course of races or just the season in general.
Yeah, very well said. Definitely pretty cool to check out. You can find it on Matt's Twitter at IndyCar_MN, and I'll repost it on the at Pitlane Parlay Twitter. And I guess I'll post it on Instagram too. Seems like we're getting some more followers on there. So let's wrap it up here. We're coming up on an hour with our pitfalls. I'll start this week. Again, I'm going to pitfall the F1 world. Not as harsh as I was last week. They had an emergency meeting today to discuss the aero kit and the lack of passing in week 1. So my first point is an emergency meeting after one race may be in a bit of an, I don't know if exaggeration is the right word or overreaction. But yes, there definitely needs to be changes. But my biggest issue is with their second of two proposed changes for 2019, which reads, the real proposal is simply for a bigger rear wing flap, which would only create a bigger effect when DRS is employed. I don't really see what that's... Exactly. I don't see... So listen, if you're within a second and a half of a car or a second of a car, great. Now you have a little bit more air for DRS to be more effective. But that's not really the issue any cars seem to have, because they couldn't get that close. So it's definitely not I don't think the right thing to do at all. Maybe a simpler aero kit with less downforce would be the plan, similar to IndyCar. Like Mario Andretti said last week or the week before, in that F1 really missed the boat here. So I won't continue to slam them because I did that enough last week. But I don't think they're taking the right direction with this, and I don't think they can really afford to, mess it up again. Otherwise, IndyCar will overtake them, which is fine with me. But I'm sure plenty of F1 people would be upset with that.
Well, I think they've earned it, don't you? I think that's fair to say, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah.
I think they've earned the pitfall.
Oh, they definitely earned it with everything I just mentioned. The DRS zone stuff and a bigger wing flap for more DRS air. I think is kind of laughable. Anyway, with that, I'll turn it over to you for yours, Matt.
Yeah, just want to say thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it, and shout out to Jess, who is she's the real MVP, and I'm sure some fans missed your fun questions today with our guest, but hopefully she's having a cheese party down there in the fantabulous Florida area. Looking forward to hearing what she has to say next week when she's back on. But yeah, thanks for you guys for having me on. So I dusted off the old monocle today and was looking at the Miller mailbag. I was actually just looking through Racer, trying to catch up on any news I might have missed before I came on, and I got to watch look at the Miller mailbag again. And within the first 6 or 7 questions on there, after doing a search, the word bump was mentioned. What's the official number here? 27 times within the first 6 questions. And it's still about this darn issue of, is there going to be bumping or is there not going to be bumping, when we've had 3 sources that have confirmed that there will be bumping if we have more than 34 or 33 entries, which we will. And someone on there was asking about the Garage 34, where there's a different chassis other than Dallara that may be run, which Miller said, to his defense, Miller did say, that's going to be, that's like a Le Mans thing. That's not a IndyCar thing with the spec series, kind of where they're going. But it's just, it's not necessarily a reflection on Miller, even though the mailbag is kind of what started the whole, maybe there won't be bumping. Maybe they'll accept all 30, which I just still is just a baseless claim. And then so multiple people have confirmed that there is going to be bumping. Mark Miles has said it himself, according to many sources. And we still get people asking, is there going to be bumping? Why won't they let everybody in? It's just, it just drives me nuts when I was reading that today. So my pitfall is half Robin Miller for keeping the conversation going about, is there going to be bumping? Because it gets a little annoying after a while. It's a bit of a twog kind of situation. And then the other half is to the people who keep writing in, not even questions. My book of questions is 1 or 2 sentences, and some of these people submit 4 paragraphs worth of information with 1 question thrown in, which I don't understand, but it gets a little hodgy-podgy after a while. So, my little pitfall of the week is kind of half-heartedly to Miller's mailbag and to the people who keep this conversation about, is there going to be bumping going, because it should have died about a week ago.
Yeah, I don't understand, especially I think Jim Aiello at Indy Star posted the other day an interview with Mark Miles where he said, yes, there will be bumping. And then, a day later, Robin Miller publishes the mailbag and, keeps trying to harp on this, well, maybe there shouldn't be story. I think the whole story really just needs to end at this point.
Well, that's another thing because he says in there, he says, 33 is a traditional number. It should be respected based on tradition. But then he's also goes on to later questions say, well, if a team is going to lose $500,000 and if it happens to be like a Junkos or a Carlin or just starting up, are they ever going to come back? And it's like, well, would you just like take a stance and just say yes or no?
Yeah.
Like stop pandering in the middle. And that's part of the problem too.
Yeah, I think if he took a side one way or another and he argued one side, I'd be cool with him continuing the conversation. Anyway, with that, wrap it up real quick. Matt, thanks for joining again. The NJ Fry We Trust T-shirts will be posted. The design will be posted. Probably by the time you're listening to this. And
they are amazing.
Yes, they. Print shop here in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, did a fantastic job. They will be for sale at some point next week when I get the online store set up. And there'll also be a few special edition Pit Lane Parlay snapback hats, which are pretty cool. Features the Wildfire Sports logo on the side, where you can listen to the show Friday at 3:15 to 4:15 Eastern. And like I said, pretty much everywhere else, iTunes, Google Play, Podbean, CastBox, Stitcher, every single podcast app you could think of, and now, as of this morning, Spotify, which is pretty cool to me. It was very difficult to get approved to get on Spotify, so I'm pretty excited by that one. And with that, Matt, do you have anything else?
No, hopefully for a safe Phoenix race, and hopefully I can beat Jake Neely at Fantasy IndyCar this week.
Yep, I hope I can continue my reign as the top rookie, or I think I was the top rookie or second rookie. Anyway, guys, enjoy the Phoenix race. Qualifying is tomorrow night, I think 8 p.m. Eastern, and the race is Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, NBCSN. Tune in, join the discussion on our Twitter at Pit Lane Parlay, and we will talk to you next week. And remember, keep your lug nuts tight.